It happened on a grey Tuesday morning, when the city still seemed half asleep, and the roar of the garbage truck echoed like thunder in the narrow streets, shaking loose bits of debris from old brick buildings. Jack Turner, 62, stood at the rear of the truck, his gloved hands numb from the chill, his breath puffing like smoke in the early dawn. He'd worked this route for 23 years, every corner holding silent memories of days when his wife would wait for him at home with coffee brewing. These days, he returned to silence and shadows, the house echoing with the absence of laughter, the quiet pressing in on him like a heavy curtain. He never imagined that amid the bags of discarded leftovers, broken furniture, and forgotten pieces of people's lives, he'd hear the tiniest, most desperate cry for help. A faint trembling meow sliced through the mechanical growl, so soft it might have been a memory, or the echo of a ghost from Jack's own past. He froze, staring into the churning metal jaws of the compactor, his heart hammering like a drum he hadn't felt beat so fiercely in years. Could a creature so small survive the crushing fate of that machine, hidden beneath layers of trash and secrets? Jack took one cautious step forward, straining to hear if the sound would come again, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Was he really hearing a cat? Or was loneliness playing cruel tricks on an old man's mind? You won't believe how this story ends. It'll touch even those with the hardest hearts, leaving you breathless and proving that sometimes miracles come in the most unexpected fur and whiskers. Jack's instincts roared to life, pushing him closer to the truck, ignoring the rank stench of rotting garbage and diesel fumes swirling around his face. He clawed through sticky black bags, flinging aside banana peels, coffee grounds and shattered glass as the hydraulics hissed with deadly impatience behind him. A screech of metal made him flinch, reminding him how the machine could turn solid objects into twisted rubble in mere seconds. Suddenly, he spotted a flash of orange fur, half buried under a ripped sheet of plastic, trembling so violently it seemed like a tiny flame flickering in the wind. The cat's eyes were wide, golden, filled with terror, staring straight into Jack's own as if pleading for a lifeline he wasn't sure he could give. A wave of memories slammed into Jack, of a ginger kitten his wife once rescued on a stormy night, the way it curled in her lap and purred away her sorrow. For a moment, time seemed to stop, the world reduced to that fragile spark of life clinging to hope amid refuse. Jack reached out his trembling hand, his fingers brushing the cat's fur as the machine's grinding grew louder, impatient for its next meal. The cat gave a tiny, desperate cry, its whiskers quivering, and Jack felt his own eyes sting with tears he hadn't shed in years. But was he already too late? Or could he defy the odds and pull this innocent soul back from the brink? He slammed the emergency stop button, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tight metal confines of the truck's rear, and silence swallowed the street in an instant. The grinding gears froze mid-crush, leaving the cat perched atop a shifting mountain of garbage, shivering and terrified. Jack scrambled higher into the truck, ignoring the wet slime beneath his boots, fighting to keep his balance as the load shifted dangerously. A sudden wave of trash gave way beneath him, nearly toppling him forward into the compactor's jaws, and for one heart-stopping second, he saw darkness yawning beneath him. He clutched the metal side rail with white knuckles, hauling himself upright as the cat mewed again, sounding weaker now, like it was fading fast. Jack's pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out the distant honking of morning traffic, and he knew there was no time left to hesitate. He reached for the cat, stretching his arm as far as it would go, fingers straining toward the tiny body trembling in fear. His glove brushed against the slick plastic beneath the cat, threatening to slide free at any second and send the animal tumbling into the dark. One slip and it would all be over. Could Jack hold on long enough to save a life and perhaps in some way save himself too? How much could one man risk for a creature he'd never met when the world was telling him to look away and move on? But just as Jack felt the cat's fur brush against his fingertips, a sharp voice barked behind him, a foreman yelling that he was risking safety violations, demanding he get out of the truck immediately, leaving Jack hanging between obedience and the fragile hope he held in his trembling hands. Jack whipped around, his breath catching in his throat as the foreman's voice cut through the morning air like a blade, echoing off brick walls and bouncing through the narrow alley. "Turner, get out of there! You want to lose your job or your life?" The man shouted, waving his clipboard like a weapon, his face flushed red with anger and fear. Jack blinked, sweat streaming into his eyes, torn between the authority barking orders and the small, fragile life hanging in the balance before him. The cat, sensing the tension, let out another trembling mewl, softer now, as if its tiny reserves of hope were draining away with every passing second. Jack's mind raced back to the nights he'd spent alone, staring at photographs of his late wife, wondering if he'd ever matter to anyone again. And now here was this little creature, eyes shining in the dim light, trusting him with everything it had left, even though the world was telling Jack to just let go. Could he really abandon it, after all he'd already lost, when it felt like saving this cat might also mean saving a piece of himself? The garbage truck sat frozen, half-loaded, its stinking cargo shifting dangerously, and every second Jack hesitated, the risk of collapse grew. He glanced at the foreman, trying to explain with just his eyes, the silent plea of a man who knew he was about to make a choice he couldn't undo. Wasn't a single life, even a tiny, frightened one, worth bending the rules for, just this once? Could you ever forgive yourself if you looked away and left an innocent creature to be crushed because of a rule book? Jack's heart beat a violent rhythm, rattling in his chest like a trapped bird as he crouched lower, refusing to abandon the cat. The foreman stormed closer, boots splashing through puddles of leaked garbage juice, eyes blazing with fury and something like fear. "I'm telling you, Turner, get down. You're gonna get crushed, man," the foreman barked, glancing nervously at the partially raised compactor. But Jack barely heard him anymore, all his senses locked onto the cat, whose tiny body was trembling so violently it seemed ready to vanish into thin air. The smell of diesel and rotting food made him gag, but he pushed forward, his fingertips brushing orange fur slick with grime. Memories flooded him. Late nights in the living room, his wife reading aloud as that same color of fur curled in her lap, purring against the hush of rain. He felt his throat tighten, a lump rising he could neither swallow nor spit out, as he realized how desperately he needed to feel useful, to matter again. The foreman's shouts grew more distant, as though Jack was sinking underwater, drowning in the weight of this single moment. And all he could think was, if he left this cat behind, what piece of his own humanity would he lose forever? Would his heart ever forgive him? Or would it stay locked behind the same silent walls he'd built since grief stole his life away? Jack took a deep breath, fighting the sting of tears, and reached further into the tangle of trash and plastic, determined to grip the cat's scruff. He felt sharp claws dig into his glove, but he welcomed the pain. It meant the little creature was still alive, still fighting to stay here. The cat let out a hiss, its ears flat against its head, but Jack whispered gentle words, hoping to calm it, though his voice cracked under the strain. Outside, traffic honked and engines growled, the city marching on oblivious while this tiny drama unfolded in a back alley few would ever see. Jack's arms trembled from holding his weight over shifting trash, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to let go even as muscles burned with fatigue. He imagined his wife standing there, urging him on with that gentle smile that could silence any storm inside him, her memory a soft lantern in his darkness. The cat's weight grew heavier in his grasp, as though all the hope in the world had settled into that fragile body, clinging to him like a lifeline. Jack shifted his stance, preparing to lift the cat to safety, his pulse racing with the possibility that he might actually pull off a miracle today. The foreman yelled something else, but Jack didn't register the words anymore. His entire world had shrunk to orange fur and golden eyes. Wasn't this the moment that could change everything? A chance to save a life and perhaps find a reason to keep going himself. He tugged the cat free, feeling its warmth flood against his chest as it struggled in his arms, claws digging into his coat, leaving tiny red scratches that stung like electric shocks. Jack tried to stand, but the garbage shifted again under his boots, throwing him off balance as he clutched the terrified animal close. Bags slid downward, tearing open, sending cascades of coffee grounds and broken bottles tumbling around his feet in a filthy avalanche. Jack gasped as his foot slipped on greasy plastic, and he felt himself falling forward, the cat screeching in panic as he twisted in midair. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as he saw the metal edge of the compactor's opening rushing toward him, gaping like the jaws of a monster. The foreman lunged forward, arm outstretched, eyes wide with terror as he shouted Jack's name so loudly it echoed down the block. The cat's fur puffed up, its tail thrashing wildly, eyes huge with terror as it clawed desperately for a hold on Jack's jacket. Jack squeezed his eyes shut, praying he wouldn't crush the cat if he hit the metal, willing himself to protect it with every ounce of strength left. His body pitched forward, teetering on the edge between salvation and tragedy, as trash and metal closed in from all sides. Would this rescue turn into one more loss in a life already scarred by too many goodbyes, or could a miracle still be waiting in the next breath? But just as Jack felt himself tipping forward into the maw of the compactor, a powerful hand grabbed the back of his jacket, and the world jerked violently, leaving him hanging between life and death, his arms locked around the trembling cat, and not knowing yet whether he or the cat was truly safe. Jack dangled in midair, suspended by the foreman's iron grip, the weight of his own body dragging him downward as garbage rained around them like foul confetti. The cat squirmed in his arms, claws digging deeper into his chest, eyes wide and wild as it yowled in terror, its tiny body vibrating like a tuning fork. Jack's boots kicked at empty air, trying to find a foothold on the slippery metal, the truck groaning beneath the shifting load of trash. The foreman's face was inches from his, flushed and strained, veins standing out on his neck as he heaved backward with all his strength. "Don't you let go of that cat, Jack!" the foreman roared, his voice trembling with fury and fear, eyes shining wet in the pale morning light. Jack couldn't speak, his throat too tight with emotion, his arms locked protectively around the fragile creature he'd risked everything to save. He felt the cat's tiny heart beating against his chest like a frantic drum, as though willing him to hang on for just one more second. Garbage bags burst open below him, splattering sour milk, coffee grounds, and shards of glass that sparkled like ice in the rising sun. The metal lip of the compactor loomed closer, with every sway of Jack's body, a dark abyss threatening to swallow them both if the foreman slipped. Was this how heroes died? In a back alley, clutching a terrified cat, while the rest of the world carried on, blissfully unaware? Would you risk your life for a creature you'd only known for seconds, simply because your heart told you it was the right thing to do? With a final heave, the foreman wrenched Jack upward, hauling him over the edge of the truck's opening, and both men tumbled onto the street. Jack hit the pavement hard, the impact rattling his bones, but he cradled the cat to his chest, shielding it from harm as trash rained down around them. The foreman sprawled beside him, panting, face pale with shock as he wiped sweat and grime from his forehead with a trembling hand. For a long moment, neither man moved, only the distant sounds of traffic and gulls filling the silence between ragged breaths. Jack lifted his head, blinking through grit and tears, and saw the cat peering up at him, its golden eyes huge, pupils wide with fear and wonder. The tiny creature let out a soft, questioning chirp, as though asking if it was finally safe, or if danger still lurked just beyond the shadows. Jack felt laughter bubbling in his chest, mixed with sobs, a sound that seemed foreign and precious after so many years of silence. He held the cat closer, feeling its warmth and the delicate rise and fall of its breath, and realized he hadn't felt this alive in a very long time. He looked at the foreman, wanting to thank him, but the words caught in his throat like a stone, too heavy to speak. Could saving this little soul really be the moment that opened a door back into life after all the years he'd spent locked behind grief? The foreman finally sat up, shaking his head, eyes glistening with a mixture of exasperation and reluctant admiration as he glared at Jack. "You're insane, Turner," he rasped, voice hoarse. "But that's the bravest damn thing I've ever seen." Jack managed a weak grin, brushing garbage off his coat, while the cat curled into his chest, vibrating with faint, tentative purrs. He stared at the cat, its orange fur streaked with dirt, but still bright as flame, a stubborn spark refusing to be snuffed out. Jack's heart twisted as he realized how close he'd come to losing both the cat and himself in the jaws of that machine, all for a life so small, yet so precious. But deep inside, something unfurled, a fragile thread of hope stretching across the dark chasm he'd been living in since his wife's passing. The foreman sighed, rubbing his temples, muttering something about paperwork and safety violations that would take all day to explain. Jack barely heard him, his entire focus locked on the cat, whose eyes seemed to hold a wisdom far older than its tiny body. A breeze swept down the alley, carrying away the stink of garbage, leaving behind a faint scent of summer grass and distant ocean salt. Was this how a new chapter began? In the most unexpected place, with a creature nobody else saw worth saving? But just as Jack began to think the worst was over, the cat's body suddenly stiffened in his arms, and its golden eyes locked onto something behind him, pupils narrowing to sharp slits, as if danger was far from finished stalking them both. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he twisted around, following the cat's unblinking stare into the shadows of the alley behind them, heart thundering like a war drum. Out of the dimness emerged a large, muscular dog, ribs visible beneath its ragged fur, eyes wild and hungry as it crept closer on silent paws. The dog's hackles rose, teeth bared in a low snarl, a sound that vibrated through the brick walls and sent a shiver racing down Jack's spine. The cat hissed violently, back arching, fur puffing out like a fiery halo as it struggled in Jack's arms, claws raking his sleeves in frantic terror. Jack tightened his grip, shielding the cat behind his coat as the dog advanced, saliva dripping from yellowed fangs, its growl deepening into a guttural warning. The foreman jumped to his feet, grabbing a metal trash lid and brandishing it like a shield, eyes wide with disbelief at this new twist of chaos. Jack felt the old ache in his knees flare up as he slowly stood, every muscle in his body quivering, determined to protect the trembling life in his arms. The dog lunged a step closer, nose twitching as it scented the cat, desperate hunger and fear warring in its dark, glistening eyes. Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry as desert sand, praying for strength he wasn't sure he possessed after the morning's ordeal. How many tests could fate throw at one man's heart before it finally broke, or discovered how unbreakable it truly was? Have you ever felt destiny pushing you to fight for someone so small, even when every instinct screamed to run away? Jack took a cautious step backward, pressing the cat tighter to his chest, feeling its racing heart hammer against his ribs like a frantic drum. The dog crept closer, ears pinned, muscles coiling as though preparing to strike, while the foreman shouted for help toward the distant street. No one answered. The city hummed on, oblivious, cars roaring past at the end of the alley, the world unaware of this fragile standoff. Jack glanced at the trash lid in the foreman's trembling hands and knew they'd never fend off the dog if it decided to attack. He dropped to one knee, speaking softly, trying to soothe the cat, whose ears flattened as it hissed again, eyes blazing with defiance. Jack's voice cracked as he whispered memories of his late wife into the cat's ear, as though the words might cast a spell of safety over them both. The dog paused, nostrils flaring as though confused by Jack's gentle murmur, head tilting slightly, ears flicking forward and back. Jack dared to hope he could calm the animal, but the dog suddenly growled again, louder, claws scraping concrete as it prepared to pounce. The cat let out a terrified wail, fur standing on end, and Jack felt tears sting his eyes as he braced himself for the coming impact. Would this day end in violence after all, despite everything he'd risked to save just one innocent life? Suddenly the foreman stepped forward, voice trembling but firm, holding out a half-eaten sandwich he'd forgotten in his coat pocket earlier that morning. "Hey buddy, easy, easy," he murmured, slowly extending the sandwich toward the dog, whose eyes snapped to the food with desperate hunger. Jack held his breath as the dog hesitated, muscles still trembling, before finally lunging forward, not at the cat but at the sandwich, ripping it free. The foreman yelped as greasy meat and bread disappeared into the dog's jaws, but Jack let out a shaky laugh, overwhelmed with relief. The dog backed away, chewing furiously, its growl fading into soft, satisfied grunts, eyes losing some of their wild glint as it swallowed every crumb. Jack gently lowered the cat, who immediately scampered behind his legs, still wary but no longer shrieking in terror, golden eyes blinking wide. The foreman wiped sweat from his brow, muttering, "That's it. I'm switching to salads. Sandwiches attract too much drama." Jack burst into genuine laughter, a sound so foreign and bright that the alley seemed to glow with new light, as if the sun itself approved. He knelt to the cat, who now crept forward, sniffing his fingers cautiously, before pressing its small, warm body against his palm in silent gratitude. Could one tiny creature really be the spark that reignites a man's entire reason for living? Jack scooped the cat into his arms once more, feeling its gentle purrs vibrating through him like music, and he knew his life had just changed forever. The foreman clapped him on the shoulder, eyes crinkled with a grudging respect that hadn't been there before, nodding as if to say he understood. Jack stared into the cat's eyes, seeing not just an animal, but a tiny messenger sent to remind him that love, courage, and hope still existed. He looked around at the alley, at the swirling city noises beyond, and realized that this filthy place had become the scene of his rebirth. The cat rested its chin on his arm, its eyes half closed, content and safe for the first time that morning, its purrs loud enough to drown out the past. Jack felt the weight of his grief lifting, not vanishing entirely, but easing just enough to let him breathe again, as though sunlight broke through heavy clouds. He knew there would still be hard days ahead, empty rooms and quiet nights, but he no longer felt quite so alone in the world. The foreman nudged him and grumbled, "So, what's the cat's name gonna be?" And Jack felt a smile blooming he couldn't contain. He looked down at the little orange survivor, who stared back with a wisdom that seemed older than time, and whispered, "Hope. Her name is Hope. Because sometimes, even in a garbage truck, life delivers the miracle you never knew you were waiting for, and proves that it's never too late to begin again."